my setup, or in this case, multiple setups here, need to be worked on. There's cables all over the place, iOS devices taking up every inch of the desk here, and in some cases, the setups are completely missing. Now in today's video, we're going to be fixing up this part of the setup with good old-fashioned iTunes and CAD. Now you might be wondering, what computer are we going to use? PowerPC, Intel, something else? Cardboard aided design. Now this area as it is functional. It can hold stuff. So even though we do have, workable surfaces here, having a surface like this is not exactly ideal when it comes to using it as a desk. However, I have some awesome cardboard pieces, or in this case I should say super cardboard, because if you're thinking that we're going to use something like this, you're completely wrong. So we have some really awesome hardware here to upgrade this part and make it that much better than how it used to be. One of the main reasons why I use this as, well, a setup area is because these also support a decent amount of weight. Now, I've had a CRT display right here sitting on this shelf for a very long time. It hasn't had any problems whatsoever. Not to mention that we have all this space underneath, which is, ideal for PC towers and similar hardware. So it can easily support a whole lot of setups, multiple monitors. We just need to make it a little better. Now in terms of actually measuring the cardboard, cutting it, making sure it fits onto the shelves here, don't worry, I already got that taken care of. I did this off camera. I had to do a couple of test cuts, make sure everything worked. But we have some pretty solid pieces to install here, so we can just jump right in to the awesome part. Now ideally it makes the most sense to have a solid piece for the entire shelf, so you have a clean finish, it's just one panel, and while we do have some of those available for these shelves, I had another idea in mind when it comes to the bottom shelf here. Now because we're going to have PC towers and who knows what else, I actually had an idea of using a panel system. So kind of like a drop ceiling or something similar like that, where it's made up of different panels or tiles. You can install them separately, but the end result is a nice clean finish. And I measured these out to be pretty much the exact same size as most of the PC towers I have. Now, except for the very last one, every one of these is 8 inches in width, and they fit pretty much perfectly. I even have them aligned as best as I possibly could, and believe me, I had to redo this multiple times in some cases, because especially with the end part here, it just wasn't that great. I had to just redo some measurements. Even still, there is some parts of this you could improve. It's done for the most part. This could just be like the first version, the first iteration of this setup. And I don't even know how useful this is going to be yet. This was just an idea. We're actually going to have to put it to use to see if it makes any sense. But hopefully you guys understand what I'm trying to say. So if we have a tower here, but we need to access something on this side, or even on this side, say like cable management or whatever, the tower itself can stay in place, plugged into whatever accessories are plugged into it, but you can easily remove everything else if needed. I don't have any concerns about this changing over time in terms of the pressure, like the weight of the system, and really just warping in general, because this is pretty densely packed. It actually took a while to cut, and unlike regular cardboard here, this is a really solid piece to have. Now obviously something like the G5 tower here is not really optimal for this setup, but to be fair, these towers are on the floor in a dedicated setup anyways, but this is pretty much like the widest that the cardboard can support, if I even decide to install it here. But to give you guys a better idea of something more realistic, is that once that clicks into place, you can have a tower like this with space on both sides, and this Dell Optiplex seems like a great option for this setup. And like I mentioned, you can easily remove this panel, remove the other panel, do maintenance or whatever, while having the tower in place. The cable mess of the pre-existing setup is obviously not that awesome to look at, but that's another benefit of the panel system. If I do decide to put cables underneath the shelf itself, because there is room for cables, I can still easily access them by removing whatever panel I need to remove. When I installed the second shelf here, I made sure to have it as close as I can possibly get it to the other desk setups, and this is mainly just to have for keyboards, mice, having it at a nicer level if you're sitting down to use the setup. Now, I understand this is not the most ergonomic setup to have, but this is still just to have a spot for accessories and, actually being able to use the setup, because if you have multiple displays here and stuff here, it's not exactly super easy to have a keyboard here. Now, it is possible to have, but it's also nice to have this extra spot here. The problem, though, is that especially if you're trying to use a mouse, as you can imagine, this is not exactly an ideal surface to use. That's where this panel comes in. Now, this is essentially the entire width of the second shelf. It's optimized to actually fit, so I made cutouts wherever needed, and this will easily slide into place. And just like that, we have a nice usable surface to work with here. We can install anything we want without it falling through the shelf, and if we actually want to use some accessories, it is possible. Now, as it is right now, it's not super ideal because this is the farthest that something like a mouse could go, or even like a keyboard. But that is where I have this panel, which comes into play. Now, this was the first piece that I cut out. As you can see, it's not looking that great. It does still get the job done. It was initially intended for this part. This was not super ideal because there's a lot of space on either side. But because this is still a cut panel, it's still in good condition apart from just the back here, we can install this here and have it adjustable. So this piece can actually be taken out of the shelf itself and acts like an extension to the desk. So if we have like the mouse, for example, instead of being limited to this, we can actually have it right here. Same goes for the keyboard. This can easily rest right here. As long as some of the weight is on the shelf here, it is just fine in terms of stability. And when we're not using the setup, this can easily go back onto the shelf here, and it looks like as if nothing actually changed. Now, because this is, of course, a smaller piece, we do have this part here. This actually works out in our favor because we have the power strip here, and if this is the part that moves, this is stationary and everything works out just fine. Now, initially for the top part of the shelf here, I thought about doing the same thing like the second part here where we just have one entire panel, but I came up with a different solution that actually covers the entirety of the shelf, and it gives it a more I guess a proper desk appearance. So first we have these panels here. Now this is just more standard cardboard, but it's like the 2-layer stuff. With the indents that we have here, this can easily slide into place, and it makes it a nice level surface. Now this is because we obviously have a height discrepancy between the railing here and the shelf, which is why these pieces work out so well, because they can just slide in. But if we want to actually make use of the entire thing here, we need something like this, which actually goes over the shelf, and we also have a matching larger piece. Now, I probably could have just done this with one piece, but this is just what I have on hand. Like I said, this is just the first version of the setup here. In terms of this addition, things can change. If I find out that the panel method is the superior method, then maybe I'll switch over to it. But in this case, we also have the same indentations here, so this creates a nice finish in terms of like an even surface, and this could actually be used for cable management maybe in the future, so I guess we'll just have to find out once we actually start using the setup. The finishing touch is this. Now this is like some kind of MDF material, so it's not necessarily cardboard, but it is, something nicer. And this actually has like a smooth finish, so it does actually kind of feel like a desk. Now the reason why I didn't just have this directly on the metal shelf is because it's like the perfect width of the shelf itself, so I'd have to modify this, and I didn't really want to do that. I figured I might as well just do it with cardboard because that's easier to cut in the first place, and I think that the end result is actually pretty cool. Now this isn't perfect, I mean the setup itself isn't perfect. Ideally it would be nice to use something like that with a wood veneer, something a bit more solid, but I don't have a lot of those, and well, I'd have to cut them to size. It just wouldn't look great. But with this, it's easier to upgrade, easier to manage, and if something gets damaged, it's not that big of a deal because I can always just replace it or change it in the future. I think the best out of these, though, it has to be the panel method because it's just a clean finish. I think it's going to be really useful in the future, but if I was doing this with like an actual budget, like I said, I'd probably go with something like that material. You might be wondering, why am I not using this in the first place? Well, there's these holes here, and well, it's just not super ideal to use in this application. Sure, I could, but I'd rather just have it like this for now. Now for the monitor situation, we can of course have the CRT display back again, maybe some flat panels, and maybe even test out some laptops in this setup. Like I said, there's a lot of potential here, but we just have to get the basics down. Now when it comes to the CRT, I had this panel initially, just this, because obviously as this is not a flat surface and the stand itself is plastic on the CRT, these will eventually leave an imprint on it. So this was to prevent that. I think I'll still leave this here for now. Probably don't need it, but I made it in the first place, so I'll probably just have it. It's just cardboard though, so it doesn't really matter. We can of course have the beige accessories to go with the rest of the beige setup, but we also have, like I mentioned, flat panels for setups like the Dell. And I know that the appearance is not the greatest, but the main goal of this setup is to both be functional and useful in terms of storage. Like I mentioned earlier, there's plenty of space for storage here, so if I can actually store the desktops that I have while simultaneously being able to use them, I see that as a win. It's obviously not going to be any cinema display setup or even the Mac Pro setup, but I think this is a good step in the right direction because this means I can actually use some of the Windows systems I have. Can you believe I don't have just Macintoshes? Crazy, I know. And I really do think this will be a good spot for testing out laptops because when it comes to laptops, that's a whole other thing. I have so many that, I haven't even taken a look at. I think with a good display, maybe a keyboard, mouse, maybe even wireless accessories, I don't know, there's a lot of potential here. Things can easily change overnight. Tomorrow we might actually have dedicated desks for every one of the setups here. But for now, I'm just making use of what I do currently have, and even though this might not be the coolest ever setup on YouTube or whatever, at least it'll get the job done, and maybe I'll have less stuff on the floor. Case in point. Now, not everything is going to get moved over here because I do have some systems that straight up just don't work because they need extra repairs or who knows what else, just like the G5 here. But this Dell does work. It needs a storage device, whether it be a hard drive or an SSD, but it does work. So this would be a good spot for this. I do have other systems that do work, but they're just put away off to the side. So if I can actually integrate them here, that would be really awesome. Here's an example of how we can actually use the setup. So we have the beige setup here with the CRT display and beige accessories. So that could be used for Windows 95 to XP, even older but even newer if we wanted to. And then we also have an LCD display here which can be used for Windows Vista and up. I do actually have not one but two of these displays. These are Acer monitors. That is the model number. And the reason why I've never used these displays is because these have the base amount, which would be nice if I actually had something to use this with, but I don't. So these have just been sitting, but they do work. And even though these are older displays, which means they only have DVI and VGA, that is more than good enough, especially for the systems that I have here. Now, accessories are a whole other thing. I have plenty of them, so whether it be a keyboard, mouse, we have lots of options to choose from, and I might even actually integrate another Dell monitor here which has a built-in soundbar. Lots of options here. This is just one example. Or if we really wanted to, we could have both of these displays here because the stand makes it possible to actually use these instead of it just falling over. And to show you guys that this is actually usable, while it does move a little bit at the end here, if you're actually doing something, even gaming, it's perfectly fine. And of course, it is adjustable, so you can adjust it however you want to use it. I think that this Dell desktop will stay here. I don't know about this specific spot or move it over to the side or whatever, but in terms of having it here in the setup, it seems like a good option because it does work. And because it's a newer system, it would run something like Windows 8 or Windows 10 way better than some of the other systems I have. Windows 7 would be fantastic, but I do have other Windows 7 systems which I would ideally use with Windows 7. So because this one is more capable, maybe I can finally try out Windows 8, which I've never tested out before, or even have a dual booted system with 8 and 10, so 10 could kind of be like something more modern to have just here, kind of like a work PC or whatever, just to have more modern Windows. But I mean, I don't know how often I'm even going to use it in the first place, but I guess it would be nice to have. Now, as for the clamshell Dell and the printer here, I'll probably put the Dell back over here, but for the printer, I think I'll just move it off to the side for now. And as for the rest of the setup here, as you can see, I did the same thing with the cardboard earlier on when I installed this setup here, because plastic right on top of metal. But in terms of actually having an entire panel for these shelves, I think this part is probably going to stay without one for now, because it's just the hi-fi equipment. But it might prove itself to be useful on this section here, especially if we add more accessories and whatnot. But for now, we're just going to work with this setup to see how well it actually works before we decide anything else over here. With that, I think we're going to start wrapping up today's video. I know we just barely started talking about the topic here, but it took me quite a while just to get the cardboard situation down. Like, this panel method alone took me a while to get where it is right now, and even then it still isn't perfect. Yeah, it's way better than the initial attempts, but it still takes a while to actually do. Same goes for the other parts here, but I'm pretty happy with how everything turned out, and I still need to get the PC towers and other accessories ready for install. Now, obviously, I will bring you guys along for the journey, but if you guys have any comments or opinions about the setup here, then go ahead and leave them down below. I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say about this. Is this a good step in the right direction? Do you approve of how this is shaping out to be? Should something change? It is, of course, possible to change things up. I just think that this is a decent start. I also haven't had a lot of time to actually improve upon the setups here, but again, I think this is actually a good step in the right direction, because we're actually making progress by making use of more technology that I have instead of it just sitting around and collecting dust. If you enjoyed today's video, then consider leaving a thumbs up, and if you want to stay updated with the project here, then consider subscribing. Again, I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about the setup as a whole, but as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.